Number 5. Because international law has its source primarily from decisions of the court of various nations, it's probably important to know how the legal systems of or in the nations of the world are characterized. In other words, every nation in the world can be characterized and have a specific legal system. There are 2 ways of characterizing the legal system of every nation. Number 1, common law system. Number 2, civil law system. The common law system means that decisions that come from the courts of a nation, stare decisis, plays an important role, which means that prior court judicial decisions are binding on current courts when resolving disputes. In a common law system nation, the decisions of the courts have importance as far as the use of the principle stare decisis. And so a court in a common law nation making a decision that becomes international law, that not only does it make the resolve the dispute among the people of the dispute, but it also, its decision becomes a part of international law. Civil law systems, which means that the law of these countries primarily come from legislative bodies, or even sometimes the kings. And prior court decisions have no binding effect on current court disputes. In other words, in civil law systems, the decisions of the courts are probably don't weigh as heavy as they do in the common law systems. And while I've started off by saying international law comes from the decisions of the courts from all nations, you can see that in some nations the court decisions are not as significant as they would be in other court decisions. Now, can you think of any nations of the world that use the common law system?
The U.S., for example.
Okay. Anybody else?
England.
Let's just put it this way. Yes?
British colonies.
Yeah. The United Kingdom and all of its colonies, which include the United States. Okay. So whatever used to be a colony of England, most likely it has a court system that uses the concept of stare decisis, and the decisions of the court have a much greater weight in those particular nations. In other words, it's very difficult for the legislature to come in and overturn a court decision. They can do it, but it's difficult to do. Whereas in civil law systems like France and most of South America and a number of other countries, the laws are really made by the legislative bodies, not too much made by the courts. And so you can see that a lot of international law comes from those countries that use the common law system more than just the civil law system. Now remember, again, I guess to emphasize this, international law is voluntary, and while there is no international army or a single agency enforcing the law, the nations of the world have developed ways to persuade a non-complying rebel nation to comply with international law. So you can't jam it down the throat, but you can be very, what do you say, influential?
Persuasive, yeah.
What?
Persuasive.
What are some of the things that the nations of the world use when there's a rebel nation that's
Nations.
obviously
Economic
breaking
sanctions.
international law? What are some of the things?
United
that-
Nations.
What?
Economic sanctions.
No. What?
Sanctions. Sanctions.
Sanctions would be one. Sanctions would be one. Tariffs, opposing tariffs can also do it. Notice both of those have a lot to do with economic aspects to that nation. And then, while there hasn't been any recently, blockades, embargoes, and blockades where our ships actually, or our armed forces actually, stop the rebel nations' ships and whatever from leaving their ports or getting to where they wanted to go. Once in a while, there's armed conflict. When was the last armed conflict where we tried to bring a rebel nation under control?
Afghanistan or Iraq?
Both of
Yeah,
them.
Iran mainly.
Iraq probably the most, and then Afghanistan, where we try to bring those nations back into the fold of all the rest of the community.
Oh, Cuba.
Nations, so that we can all get along and we can have good trade with each other and everybody benefit. And sanctions and all that stuff didn't work, and so we put in an army. And we took out the dictator, and we used the excuse that there were weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
And then we find out that
There's
there weren't
nothing.
any. They
Yeah.
didn't know what they were talking about. But by that time, the war had started, didn't stop right away.
Mhm.
And nobody had the foresight to see what that was gonna do to that nation. I think it made it worse. It just, made it chaos. The people that lived there, they were without water, without electricity. Nobody had the foresight to be able to go in and rebuild a nation. And that's what, they're still trying to do. And then, of course, we've got Afghanistan. There are other nations over there that we haven't put an army in, but who knows? We have a track record of doing it. Okay, now, remember, the primary purpose of an international law is to facilitate commerce, transactions between the various nations or people of various nations, and the result will be to maintain social order and control. So let's talk about the primary sources or things that a courts will use when resolving a dispute. Number one, the courts will want to know, and they want to look at international customs that have developed between nations and their relations with each other. International customs that have developed between nations and their relations with each other. These are sometimes called norms, N-O-R-M-S. Not where you get the steak and eggs. Number two, the courts will want to look at what treaties, we finally caught it, right? What treaties and formal agreements exist between the nations, especially the nations involved in the dispute. A couple of years ago, U.S. and Russia made an agreement to have Syria turn over all of its chemical weapons. I think it's been pretty much done by now, but that was a formal agreement between two big heavyweights in the world dealing with a real touchy, difficult subject. Then number three, international organizations and their influence over the nations of the world. The United Nations, of course, where there's a meeting going on in New York right now, is a very important international organization. The U.S. is a member of over 100 international organizations. So when a dispute comes before the court, not only does the court want to take a look at the legal principles that have developed over the last 80 years, but they also want to look at, okay, what are the international customs? What are the norms between the nations? We don't want to make a decision and then find out that the people that's involved have, this is so far in left field, they don't even know how to deal with it. Then we want to look at the treaties and formal agreements. And then we want to look at the international organizations that have had some influence over this subject matter. So when it's all said and done, the court intercedes and looks at all that kind of stuff and then comes up with a decision. That decision is only binding upon the parties to the lawsuit. but it can also become a legal principle that becomes a part of international law. If there's no legal principle already there, it's the same as it is.
Would it be called first impression also?
Well, it's like first impression. It's not part of it. Obviously, if a decision of a court, and the question is, should we make this part of international law? The first thing they're gonna look and see, is there already a law that says the same thing? If it is, then we don't need to make it a part of it again. If there is nothing, then they can add it to the international law. When I went to law school a long, long time ago, there was no such thing as international law. Or if it was just a beginning subject, and only a few people went into international law because not too many law firms did anything. Of course, today, it's become a large body of law, and a lot especially involved, and there are major law firms throughout the country, even in the Midwest, that deal with an international law. And so it's just, become a big area of the law. If any of you ever go into business or work in a business where you're dealing with some other country and people in another country, then you probably need to have some knowledge of international law, or it's going to come into play at some point in time. Now, when the courts of various nations are making decisions relating or involving international disputes, there are some important principles that the courts will follow to accomplish the purpose: facilitate business and have harmonious relationships. That's the purpose. So I want to go through 3 principles that the courts use. The author of your book provides also an explanation. I'll try to do it as short as I can. The first one is a principle of comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y. C-O-M-I-T-Y. It's pronounced comity. So what is this principle? One nation will defer, D-E-F-E-R, and give effect. One nation will defer and give effect to the actions, A-C-T-I-O-N-S, and judicial decrees of another nation, so long as they are consistent with the law or the public policy of that nation's laws. For example, the enforcement of a default judgment that was made in a foreign country, now trying to be enforced in America, in the United States. Will the courts in the United States recognize that judgment and allow it to be enforced? They will, so long as what is being done, or what is being asked for, is compatible with the laws of our courts.
So the Convention of La Haye or something like that?
Something like that.
Yes.
It's been resolved a long time ago. He's talking about the Convention of Hague dealing with child custody and child support of international children. And that's been resolved a long time ago, that the United States will enforce that law. Okay? I'm talking about the judgment of one nation. Let's suppose the nation of France, the courts over there award a big judgment against a company here in America. And so they got a judgment over there, and now they're hired a lawyer over here to enforce that judgment, and they have to go to court to get an American execution to enforce that. And the issue is, well, they'll only enforce that so long as the laws of that other nation are compatible with the laws of America. If they're not compatible, then they won't enforce it. That principle is called the principle of comity. The next principle, the act of state doctrine. The act, ACT, of state doctrine. This deals with a judicial branch of one country will not examine the validity of the public acts committed by a recognized foreign government within its own territory. Let me say that again.
What's the difference, the
It's
name?
called the Act of State Doctrine. It's a principle found in international law. And it provides, this act provides that the judicial branch of one country will not examine the validity of the public acts committed by a recognized foreign government within its own territory. So the country of Brazil decides to take over all of the oil industry in Brazil. Take it away from the private owners. Now they become public companies of the country. Those private countries like Exxon and Shell and probably some other ones, they say, wait a minute, that's cost us a lot of money for you just to take over all of those all that industrial stuff that we built there. And so those companies go to the courts in America and they say to the courts in America, we want you to do something about what the country of Brazil has done, or at least make them pay. They condemned our industry and took over. We at least make them stop or make them pay for what they've taken. The Act of State Doctrine says that if Brazil, number one, is a recognized country here in America, and it is, if it was valid for Brazil government to do it in Brazil, then the United States and the courts in the United States cannot take any action.
Wow.
That's true. Any company that goes into a foreign country always risks the loss of losing their company if the foreign government, country of the foreign government, decides to take it and make it public of their own. But they still do it because there's a risk and a reward in anything. They can make a lot of money too. And that doesn't mean all the countries of the world are just going to start taking over private companies, because if it does, you can see the chaos and the turmoil that's going to create. It does happen on occasion. It has happened in some of the South American countries, yes.
Can you repeat the definition again one more time?
Do the what, the definition?
The definition of the Act of State of Doctrine.
Okay. This doctrine, this state doctrine provides, and this again is used in the courts when there's a legal dispute, provides that judicial branch of one country will not examine the validity of the public acts committed by a recognized foreign government within its own territory. Now, if you don't understand it, don't be surprised. It's hard to understand. But
But they do get involved when it's like, some type of unhumane.
when you read the chapters in the chapter in the book that and specifically deals with this, read the handout material that I give you the definition there. Don't do it now, because I have to move on and then you won't be up with me. The last important principle that we find in international law is called sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity exempts foreign nations from jurisdictions of the U.S. courts, and also the people who work for those foreign nations. Foreign nations have a lot of embassies in the United States. They have a lot of employees that work. When an embassy is placed in the United States, it's the country there. The laws of the United States have no application to that nation or to the people who live in that nation who just happen to work there in that. Do you understand that concept? Russia has an embassy. I believe it's in New York. They have a lot of people who work in the embassy. That is like
A piece of
little
furniture.
nation of itself.
Yeah.
Placed, It's like the Indians have in their territories, a little nation of themselves. A couple of years ago, one of the employees of the Russian agency had driven off of the reservation, shall we say, off the embassy property, and was drunk and committed drunk driving and hit somebody and killed them. And of course, that person was arrested, and the issue was whether or not they could prosecute that person because they had immunity under the act called sovereign immunity, and that's true. They couldn't prosecute him.
Does it say the diplomatic immunity?
No, it's called sovereign immunity. But I suppose diplomatic immunity comes out of that same concept. Now, for the last part of this session, I want to just talk really quick about if you want to turn to page 2 of this handout material now, paragraph 8. This is an entirely different subject. It really doesn't have anything to do with the law at all, but it might have something to do now or sometime in the future. And it deals with the concept, and the authors of this chapter deal with this concept of doing business in a foreign country. Any of you do business in a foreign country? Okay, so this is kind of new to you. Here, when a maker or seller of goods that is located in America wants or decides to try and sell the goods in a foreign country to a buyer in that foreign country, he or it will basically have two ways of doing it. Letter A. Exporting. We just write it. Export.
Wait, where are we? Are we looking at this?
Well, yeah, but I'm on page 2 of that. Keep turning. Keep turning. Keep turning. Well, that doesn't look right to me. Do you see, do you see on the back of the first page? No, turn, it should be, close that whole hand up again. I'm sorry, no, close it up. Close it all up. Now just turn it one, no, don't.
You said to close it out.
Here's it. Let me have it.
Well, and it's here.
I was trying to point it out.
I don't know where his.
It's on the back of the
It's
second
this
page.
one.
So now we have Tom. Tom makes small garden tractors, and he does it here in Southern California. And over the last few years, his business has kind of gone down because not too many people buy garden tractors. How many of you raise a garden in your home or at your place? See? Nobody needs a garden tractor. So Tom decided he needed to figure out how to expand his business. And his mind worked a lot, and he figured out, what I got to do is find new customers for my garden tractor. And so he decides he wants to try to sell or find customers for a tractor in Mexico. All right? So now he makes those products, remember, now he wants to try to sell them in Mexico. What are the two ways that he might use in order to get his product sold in Mexico? First of all, export. Export the product. You understand what the export means? Get it over there some way or another. You export it out of this country and import it into that country. There are two ways to export a product. In this case, Tom's garden tractor. Number one, direct export. Direct export. You're still not on the right page, and I even turned it
Who?
for you.
Me? What?
You told me here.
What's up here?
That is right.
I'm looking. Okay, you're right. I didn't recognize that little sign you have there for several places you have drawn.
What did I draw?
Oh,
Over there.
I guess it's for
Oh.
holding the paper. Whatever. Direct export. So Tom is going to use direct export. So what he has to do, of course, is find a buyer, and but I don't know much about all the little countries that Mexico has, but Guadalajara, is that in Mexico?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, definitely.
How is he going to find buyers in that little part of Mexico?
Goes to Santana and
See, how's he gonna do it? How's he gonna stimulate potential interest? How's he gonna market his product? Because he wants to use direct exporting, which basically means he needs to sell his product to a buyer, and probably the ultimate user, in that little town of Mexico. So how's he gonna let them know that he's got something that they might like to have?
Establish a dealership?
He could just go down there? He can just go down there, sure. But you know, Tom is busy making his garden tractors. He can't go down there and spend 3 months trying to stimulate business, so what other way might he do it?
promoting.
I-
Business partner.
Or he just hires somebody to go down there, he could hire you.
No, he's
And you
working
could
in
go
a-
down there
oh,
and he'll pay you to go down there and drum up business, as we say, okay? So now you are down there and you're gonna use all of the skills that you have in trying to sell this product. You know, obviously you're gonna either go door to door or you're gonna have a big banquet or you're gonna get some way of stimulating business. Or, well, let's just leave it at that, okay? Or you might get an airplane and make up a whole bunch of leaflets and drop them out, whatever it takes. But just be careful, don't make them in English, okay? Be in Spanish, all right? Make sure. And if you don't know Spanish, then you're not gonna get hired. Because one of the requirements is you have to know Spanish to go down there. Well, eventually you drum up some business and you have them enter into a contract. And then you let your employer know, let Tom know. And then you set up all the arrangements for how it's gonna get down there. How can you ship down there? What's the best way to get a garden tractor down to Guadalajara?
You drive it?
A truck?
Train.
Oh,
You can't drive these garden tractors. These are little garden tractors, okay? They're not big, they don't have a seat on them, okay? So okay, somebody said you put them on a truck. You put them on a ship.
it's bigger actually. That's-
Any other way you could do it besides truck and ship? A train, a plane. Well,
Yeah,
I guess, whatever way is most economical for Tom, and of course, he's gonna have it delivered. Now, you're gonna be down there, so they're probably gonna ship it to you, and then you're gonna take it to the buyer, and guess what you're gonna do? You're gonna collect the money, you're gonna take out your commission, and you're gonna send the rest to Tom. And that's the way Tom is gonna develop his business of selling garden tractors on a direct export method down there. The second way of exporting, besides direct, is indirect. Well, that makes sense. One way is direct, the other way is indirect. When deciding to do it in this direct method, there are two companies or people that you can employ. One is called a foreign agent, and the second is called a foreign distributor. Instead of sending you down there to try to find buyers, Tom usually says, you know, it's probably cheaper for me or better for me if I find an agent down there in Guadalajara who maybe already sells other garden equipment, and I'll contract with that person, and that person then will go off and try to sell my garden tractors. The foreign agent, the foreign distributor. Both of them take possession of the product. You make a contract with them, and they take possession of the product. So they have the product there, maybe in their warehouse, on their floor, whatever. Second, their main job is to find buyers for your product. Their main job is to find buyers for your product. Number three, sell the product and collect the money.
Within export,
Both
still,
of them. What?
we're still in export.
We're talking about foreign agents and foreign distributors. These are businesses or individuals down in Guadalajara that you can hire to sell your product. You don't have to hire somebody and send them down there. Foreign agent, foreign distributor. Number one, they both take possession of your product. You send it down there to them. That's the way they can sell it. Number two, they go out and try to find buyers. Number three, they sell the product and they collect the money. And then they send the money to the American company. They usually take out their commission and send the difference to Tom. They all do, both of these, the foreign agent and foreign distributor, do the same thing. So what's the difference?
Trust.
No. You have to have trust for both of them. Here's the difference, and this is something you've got to write down and understand. The difference is the risk of loss when the product is lost or destroyed while in the possession of the agent or distributor. The difference is the risk of loss when the product is lost or destroyed while in the possession of the agent or the distributor. The question is, who has the greater risk? The agent or the distributor?
The agent.
The answer is the distributor. The agent, didn't I tell you already, if you don't know the answer and you're gonna guess, just do the opposite of what you think it is? By the way, that's a good way to take a
Because
test
isn't the
question.
agent,
When you're not sure of no, I'll get to that. When you're not sure of what the answer is, you think that, oh, this must be the answer. Then just pick the other one.
That's true.
Greater chance of being right. Okay, talking about the difference of risk of loss here between the agent and the distributor, and I've already told you that the distributor has a greater risk of loss, and the reason being is, even though the agent takes possession, he never takes ownership. Tom always is the owner of the product. The agent is just what he is. He's got the product, but it still belongs to Tom. Tries to find a buyer, sells it, and sends the money to Tom. The distributor actually becomes the owner of the product. The distributor has an agreement with Tom